The sky over Delhi was soft and quiet that morning. The air was filled with the scent of wet earth after a light drizzle. People moved through the capital with their usual rhythm, unaware that inside the Prime Minister's residence, something deeply personal was about to unfold. Narendra Modi sat quietly in his office, staring at a single envelope on his desk. It was old, yellowed at the edges, and the handwriting on it was careful, almost hesitant. The return address read, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. He reached for it slowly, as if the paper itself carried weight heavier than it should. His fingers brushed the name on the back, Lakshmi Pichai. He remembered the name immediately. Lakshmi had written to him 5 years ago just once. It wasn't political. It wasn't about any policy or complaint. It was a letter from a mother, a proud mother. Her son Sundar had just become the CEO of Google, and she wanted to thank the country that raised him. In her letter, she said something that stayed with Modi ever since. My son left with nothing but a metal trunk and a mind full of dreams. Today, he leads one of the biggest companies in the world. India gave him the spine to stand straight, and that I will never forget. But Modi never responded. Not because he didn't want to bet, because sometimes, in the whirlwind of national duties, even the most heartfelt moments can get buried. Until now. Modi was going to meet Sundar Pichai today. It was an official meeting. Policy discussions, tech partnerships, AI and governance. But Modi knew deep down this meeting was not going to be about silicon or servers. It was about a mother's letter, and a son who had once walked barefoot across railway platforms. Inside the Taj Palace Hotel, Sundar stood in front of the mirror. His collar was perfect, his words rehearsed, but his eyes betrayed something else. Tiredness, maybe, or hesitation. He hadn't been back to India in almost 3 years. Not like this. Not as the face of the future. He was still the boy from Chennai, who once ate idealists with 5 rupees in his pocket and walked to school because he couldn't afford a cycle. His mother, Lakshmi, sat nearby on the bed, adjusting the pleats of her sari. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something else, emotion. She was nervous, more nervous than her son. She had never been inside a prime minister's office, never thought she would sit across from the leader of the country, and she hadn't told Sundar about the letter. He didn't know she had written to Modi, didn't know she had poured her heart out onto a page and posted it with trembling fingers. As the convoy arrived, Modi waited at the door himself, a rare gesture. Sundar stepped out first, followed by Lakshmi. The cameras flashed, but the Prime Minister's eyes weren't on the tech genius. They were on the woman beside him. He smiled warmly, folded his hands in a namaste, and said softly, Aapka intezar. Lakshmi didn't expect it. Her breath caught. Sundar looked at her, puzzled, but Modi only smiled more. He led them inside. The meeting room was modern and sharp. Screens lined the walls. Chai was poured. Polite conversations were exchanged. But then, Modi asked for the room to be cleared. Aides, officials, even the media team, everyone was asked to step out. Sir, Sundar asked, uncertain. I wanted a moment with your mother, Modi said gently. And with you, not the CEO of Google, but the boy from Chennai. Sundar sat down slowly. Lakshmi looked uncomfortable, unsure of what was happening. Modi reached into his drawer and placed the yellowed envelope on the table. I never forgot this letter, he said. Sundar turned sharply. Letter. Modi slid it toward Lakshmi. Her hands covered her mouth. She didn't know he still had it. I couldn't answer then, Modi said, but I read it twice. And every time I speak of India's strength, I think of your words. Today, before we talk about AI and infrastructure, I want to talk about a mother's pride. Sundar looked at the letter, then at his mother. She was crying now softly, silently. He reached for her hand. You wrote to the Prime Minister? He asked. Lakshmi nodded. tears flowing now. I just wanted him to know you were raised here, by this country, and that we never forgot where we came from. For a moment, there was no noise, no protocols, no titles, just a son, a mother, and a man who had been reminded that behind every great story, there is always someone who believed first. Modi's voice broke the silence. You know, we often talk about brain drain, but I see it differently. I see it as a promise sent out into the world. And today, the world knows Sundar Pichai, but I want the world to remember Lakshmi too. Because behind that success, there was a woman packing food in a steel tiffin, praying for train tickets, and telling her son to dream beyond the sky. Lakshmi looked down, overwhelmed. Sundar's eyes burned, not from shame, not from pain, but from something deeper: recognition, gratitude. The press would later report the meeting as a tech policy summit. They would talk about digital inclusion and smart governance. But in that room, something else had happened. Something no camera could capture. A forgotten letter had finally been answered, and a mother's tears had become the quiet anthem of a generation raised on hope. The ride back from the Prime Minister's office was silent at first. Sundar sat beside his mother in the back seat, watching the trees pass through the tinted glass. He kept glancing at her hands folded in her lap, still trembling slightly from the emotion of the meeting. She wasn't crying anymore, but something had shifted. Her silence wasn't from sadness. It was something heavier, something deeper, almost sacred. He finally asked, Uma, why didn't you tell me you wrote him? She looked at him and smiled gently. Because it was never about what he would say back. It was enough that I could speak. And when you speak from the heart, Beta, sometimes that's the only reward you need. Sundar nodded, unsure what to say. The letter, Modi's words. The unexpected emotion in that cold meeting room, it all swirled in his mind like a storm. His phone buzzed. A message from the PMO's secretary. Sir, Prime Minister Modi has invited you and Mrs. Pichai for a special visit tomorrow morning. Please clear your schedule. The visit will not be made public. He stared at the screen, then showed it to his mother. She tilted her head, confused. What does he want to show us now? I don't know, Sundar whispered. But it seems important. The next morning, Delhi was glowing under soft golden sunlight. Their car moved quietly through narrow lanes until it turned into a quiet residential neighborhood. There were no flags, no red carpets, only a few guards and an open gate. Modi himself stood outside the gate, waiting again. Lakshmi stepped out first, this time. She was wearing a plain blue sari with a faded gold border, her hair tied back neatly. Sundar followed, still unsure what this place was. Modi led them inside without saying a word. The house was small, 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, a low ceiling. Fans spun lazily. On the wall, a photograph hung framed carefully. It showed a young boy standing barefoot in a dusty schoolyard, smiling at the camera with a lunchbox in his hand. Lakshmi stopped walking. She stared at the photo, then slowly covered her mouth with her hand. Yeah, this is your school, she said to Sundar in a hushed voice. Sundar moved closer to the picture. He stared at it for a long time. The background was unmistakable. It was the government school in Chennai, where he studied until 8th standard. He hadn't seen it in years. Modi broke the silence. This was taken from the archive of the Tamil Nadu Board of Education. We found it last year during a school renovation. Lakshmi turned to him, surprised. You kept it, not just kept it, Modi said with a warm smile. We built something because of it. He led them through the house into a small backyard. There, standing like a quiet giant, was a large wall engraved with names, dozens of them. Beneath the names, it said, Children of India who rose from nothing so others may rise too. Right in the center, larger than the rest, was the name, Sundar Pichai. Lakshmi gasped. Modi turned to them and spoke softly. This house is a tribute to resilience, to mothers like you, to children like him. It will become a community learning center, a place where children from villages and slums can come, learn coding, speak English, and dream bigger. He paused. We're naming it Lakshmi House. Lakshmi stared at him, her eyes filled again. Not Sundar House? She asked gently. Modi shook his head. No, because Sundar's dreams came from you. Sundar looked at the wall. His heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness. Pure, humble stillness. For years, he had been building companies, raising numbers, leading teams. But this was different. This was home. He turned to his mother. Amma, it's your name. Your name will guide them. Lakshmi wiped her tears. I never needed a name on a wall. I only wanted you to believe you belonged. Modi turned to Sundar. Will you speak with the children today? They've come. They've been waiting to meet you. Sundar nodded. A bell rang softly inside the house. Then, through the side gate, about 20 young boys and girls walked in, all from nearby villages. Some barefoot, some with backpacks held together by thread, all of them nervous. Sundar knelt down and smiled. Hi, I'm Sundar. A small boy stepped forward, shy and quiet. You are from Google, Sundar chuckled. Yes, but I'm also from a place just like yours. The boy looked down at his feet. My father says we can never be like you. Sundar paused, then looked the boy in the eye. Can I tell you a secret? The boy nodded. My father once sold his gold ring to buy me a train ticket. I wore the same pair of sandals until the sole came off. And when I first used a computer, I didn't know how to type. The boy looked up slowly. Sundar smiled and touched his shoulder gently. What matters is not where you begin. What matters is that you never stop walking. The children gathered around him. Questions poured in. Laughter followed. Even Lakshmi sat down on the ground with them, teaching one of the girls how to fold a paper into a boat. Modi watched silently from a distance. Later, as the sun began to lower, Lakshmi walked up to Modi. Thank you, she said. No, he replied softly. Thank you. The world needed to see that greatness doesn't come from privilege. It comes from quiet hands and mothers who believe. As they prepared to leave, Sundar turned one last time toward the wall. His fingers traced the name Lakshmi, and for the first time in years, he wasn't running toward success. He was walking back into his roots. The evening after their visit to Lakshmi House, Sundar sat alone by the hotel window. The city lights shimmered like fireflies caught in glass, but his mind wasn't in Delhi. It was in Chennai. It was on the train platforms, the narrow streets, the warmth of dosa on a steel plate, and the sound of his mother humming while folding clothes late at night. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a reminder. National Youth Summit, keynote address, -10 a.m. Tomorrow, venue. Vigyan Bhavana's assistant had sent him the draft of the speech hours earlier. It was polished, full of statistics, innovation terms, and phrases like disruptive potential and next-gen talent. But Sundar couldn't read it. Something inside him had shifted. He walked to the desk, sat down, and opened a blank page. He stared at it for a long time. Then he typed slowly, like he was speaking to one child. Not a crowd, not an audience. Just one child who didn't believe he was enough. The next morning, the grand hall was packed. Over 1,000 students from across India had gathered. Some wore formal suits, others wore school uniforms. Some came from Delhi colleges, others from remote tribal schools. Cameras were placed, lights were set. Journalists filled the back rows. Lakshmi sat quietly in the third row, wearing a white sari with soft purple flowers. Next to her sat education leaders, tech founders, and union ministers. But she looked only at the stage. Modi was already seated, nodding as the anchor announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome the pride of India, the CEO of Google, Mr. Sundar Pichai." The hall erupted in applause. Sundar walked slowly to the podium. He wore a simple navy blue curtain knot, a suit. He didn't carry any paper, no tablet, no teleprompter. He stood still, took a deep breath, and looked straight into the crowd. Then, he smiled. "I was supposed to speak to you today about the future of technology," he began. "But if you don't mind, I want to tell you a story instead." The hall went silent. "When I was a boy, I lived in a two-room house in Chennai. We didn't have a refrigerator until I was 12. My father worked long hours and saved 4 years just to buy a scooter. We didn't have a phone. When we needed to make a call, we walked to a nearby shop and used the public booth." He paused. "I remember the first time I saw a computer. I was in college. It wasn't mine. I had to wait in line just to touch the keyboard. The screen glowed, and I didn't understand what to do. I was nervous. I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough." He let that sentence hang in the air. "But here's what I want you to know," he said, his voice steady. "Dreams are not born in air-conditioned rooms. They're born in small kitchens, on crowded buses, in whispered prayers." Lakshmi's eyes began to fill again. "My mother," Sundar continued, "she never went to college. She didn't understand silicon or programming, but she knew how to believe. When I failed a test, she didn't scold me. She made me tea. And when I didn't believe in myself, she did it for me." He looked across the audience and added gently, "Some of you here today may feel like you don't belong. Maybe you think success is only for others. Maybe you come from a village, or your English isn't strong, or your parents can't afford books." He leaned forward slightly. "But I am here to tell you none of that can stop you." Silence held the room like a heartbeat. "India does not rise through its privileged," he said. "It rises through those who build their future from scratch. One step at a time. One dream at a time. One belief at a time." Someone in the crowd began to clap. Then another. And then the entire hall stood up. Sundar stepped back from the podium and folded his hands. But as he walked off the stage, he heard something unexpected. Modi himself stood and began clapping slow and steady. The ministers followed. Then the camera crews. Even the security guards. Lakshmi sat quietly, her hands clasped together tightly on her lap, but tears ran down her cheeks, soft and silent, not for the words, but for the boy who had once brought home a broken pencil, ashamed that he couldn't afford another one, and who now stood on the world's stage to tell children like him they belonged. Later that night, back at the hotel, Sundar sat with Lakshmi in the garden. She turned to him and said, "I didn't understand all the English you spoke, but I felt every word." He chuckled. "Neither did I. I just spoke from here," he said, pointing to his chest. Lakshmi looked up at the stars. "Your Appa would have been so proud." Sundar nodded. "He's still here. Every time I make a hard decision, I hear his voice." Lakshmi's voice turned soft. "I don't want them to just know your name, Sundar. I want them to know your truth." He took her hand gently. "They will, Uma. Because today, I finally spoke it." She smiled, the kind of smile only a mother can give, a mixture of pride, peace, and prayer. The city around them buzzed on traffic, voices, horns, the rush of India continuing to move forward. But for Sundar and Lakshmi, the night was still quiet, complete. Just 2 days after the youth summit, Sundar and Lakshmi boarded a quiet early morning flight to Chennai. No reporters followed. No cameras waited. It wasn't an official visit. It was a homecoming. Sundar hadn't stepped foot inside his old school in over 25 years. The last time he stood at the gate, he was a thin teenager with a worn satchel, a borrowed notebook, and shoes with cracked soles. His dreams were still silent, then untouched by the world, fragile and waiting. As the car pulled up near the entrance, Lakshmi looked out the window and whispered, "Still looks the same." But it didn't. The gate was rusted. The wall was chipped. A small dog slept in a patch of shade beside the broken boundary line. Sundar stepped out slowly. He had worn a simple cotton shirt and jeans. Nothing that made him look like the CEO of anything. Just Sundar, the boy who once forgot his lunchbox and got scolded by the math teacher. A young watchman sat on a plastic chair, dozing. "Anna," Sundar said politely. The man woke up with a start. "Yes, sir. Can we walk around? I studied here years ago." The guard squinted. Something about Sundar looked familiar, but he couldn't place it. Yes, please go ahead," he nodded, waving them in. They stepped through the gate. Inside, the air was thick with heat and silence. The playground was dry. The swings hung limp and rusty. A faded tricolor flag leaned tiredly on a crooked pole as they walked through the old hallway. Sundar noticed the walls were damp, paint peeled like dried skin. The science lab door had no lock. Most windows were cracked. In one corner, a broken fan swung slightly, making a squeaking noise that felt like a whisper of years gone by. Lakshmi said nothing. She just walked slowly, letting her fingers run along the wall. Then they entered his old classroom, and Sundar stopped walking. Inside, about 20 children sat on the floor, cross-legged. Their teacher stood barefoot, writing on a half-broken blackboard with a chalk that kept snapping. The children had no desks. Some had no shoes. One girl used her lap as a table to balance her notebook. The teacher turned. He blinked, and his mouth opened slightly. "Is it really?" Sundar smiled and nodded. "You're Sundar Pichai." The classroom buzzed. The children looked up, confused. The teacher hurried forward, unsure whether to shake hands or bow. "You came back," he said, overwhelmed. "I had to," Sundar replied quietly. "This place made me." They invited him to sit on the one plastic chair in the room. Lakshmi sat beside a girl and helped her sharpen a pencil with a small blade from her bag. The girl looked up at her and smiled. The teacher introduced himself. His name was Shankar. He had been working here for 12 years. "We try our best," he said softly. "But funds are low. The building is old. Sometimes the electricity cuts out during class." Sundar looked around again. He thought about the innovation labs he had seen in Silicon Valley, the glass buildings, the robotic arms, the walls filled with smartboards. And then he looked at these kids. Their eyes were not any less curious. They were just tired and forgotten. A little boy raised his hand. "Are you really the Google uncle?" Everyone laughed. Sundar chuckled too. "Yes, I guess I am." The boy continued. "How did you go from here to there?" Sundar paused. "By remembering where I came from." He stood up and turned to the teacher. "Do you mind if I speak to them for a few minutes?" The teacher stepped aside. Sundar walked to the front of the class. He took a deep breath. "I sat right there," he said, pointing to the third row. "I didn't always get the answers, right? Sometimes I was too scared to ask questions. But I had teachers like Sir here, who told me it was okay to fail, as long as I kept trying." The children stared at him wide-eyed. "You may not have fancy chairs or smartboards, but you have something stronger, your mind, and no one can take that away from you." He paused, then added softly, "But still, you deserve better." That night, back at the hotel, Sundar didn't sleep. He sat with a notepad, scribbling ideas. A vision began to take shape. He called his assistant in California. "I want to set up a project. We'll start with 1 school, then 10, then 100. I want modern classrooms, teacher training, working bathrooms, solar panels, and internet access. And I want them built fast." His assistant hesitated. "Should we run this through the foundation?" "No," Sundar said. "This is personal. This is from me." Lakshmi walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. She heard the last part of the call. "From you?" she asked. Double quotes. "Yes," he nodded. "They gave me everything, Oma, and they have nothing now. That isn't right. She sat beside him and looked at the notepad filled with scribbles. Are you going to name it Pichai Schools? He looked up and smiled. No, I want to call it Classroom of Dreams. Lakshmi leaned her head gently against his shoulder. You're still that same boy. He put an arm around her. I just want to make sure that no child sits on a broken floor again and thinks that they are forgotten. Within days, construction teams were contacted, architects were briefed, engineers visited the school, and just 2 weeks later, bulldozers arrived at the gates. But this time, the media found out. Headlines exploded. Sundar Pichai returns to his school starts. India's fastest school rebuild. Mission from cracked floors to coding labs of dreams begins in Chennai. A CEO remembers his roots. Lakshmi's son changes everything, but for Sundar, the only headline that mattered was the one he saw in the eyes of the children when he returned 1 month later. New paint, fresh books, desks lined in rows, fans spinning, and on every desk, a single notebook with a line printed across the top. This is your story. Write it boldly. He watched them smile, play, learn, and deep in his heart, Sundar knew this wasn't just about buildings. It was about belief that no child is too small to dream, and no dream is too big to begin on a classroom floor. 3 months after launching the Classroom of Dreams project, Sundar stood in front of a different crowd. This time, it wasn't children on a dusty floor. It wasn't a quiet room filled with humble smiles. It was the United Nations Hall in Geneva, rows of diplomats, world leaders in sharp suits, tech giants, economists, CEOs, presidents, representatives from over 90 countries. Cameras streamed the summit live across global networks. The event was titled, Future of Technology, Equity, and Global Education. Sundar was invited to give the keynote speech. His name was on the top of the program. Some introduced him as one of the most powerful voices in tech. Others whispered that he would unveil Google's next big global initiative. They were all wrong. He hadn't come to talk about Google. He had come to talk about a wall in Chennai, backstage. His assistant handed him the official speech draft prepared, reviewed, perfectly scripted. He didn't take it. Instead, Sundar reached into his pocket and unfolded a worn-out paper. It had 3 lines written in his own handwriting. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Applause rang through the hall. He began with a quiet voice. Before I start, I want to show you something. The screen behind him lit up. A photograph appeared. A small classroom, 20 children on the floor, a cracked blackboard, a teacher barefoot. The audience watched silently. This, Sundar said, is where I started. And this is where millions still begin their education today. Not just in India. Not just in developing nations. But in every part of the world where the system favors the privileged and forgets the rest. He clicked again. A second image. A new classroom, fresh paint, sunlight through large windows. Children smiling, raising hands, sitting at desks with open books. And this, he continued, is what happened when belief met action. He paused. You invited me here to speak about the future. But we cannot talk about tomorrow if we forget where we began. I am not here today as the CEO of a tech company. I am here as the son of a mother who skipped meals to buy me books. As the student of a teacher who taught without electricity. And as a child of a country that gave me its last coin and told me to go build something bigger. Many in the audience sat straighter. When we talk about innovation, we speak of labs, funding, strategy. But we forget the most powerful innovation of compassion. Real innovation is when we design systems that remember the forgotten, when we build tools that serve not the next billion, but the first billion that were left behind. A diplomat from France leaned forward, stunned, double quotes. 3 months ago, I returned to my childhood school. The floors were cracked. The children were learning with torn books. They had no internet, no library, no dreams. And that's when I decided this can't wait for someone else to fix. So we started a mission, not a program, not a policy, a mission to rebuild classrooms, to restore hope, one school at a time. He let those words breathe. We called it Classroom of Dreams, and it is not a charity. It is a promise that the next generation of thinkers, builders, poets, doctors, leaders will not be denied just because they were born in the wrong PIN code. A murmur moved through the audience. Sundar's voice grew softer. You ask what the future of global education looks like. It looks like this. He clicked again. The screen showed a short video. Children in rural India coding with small laptops. Teachers attending digital workshops under solar lights. A young girl from Orissa showing an app she had built to help local farmers check weather patterns. The audience broke into applause, but Sundar wasn't done, and I say this now. He continued firmly, it is time we stop waiting for governments alone to solve inequality. Companies must step forward. Leaders must look back. Because if you don't remember where you came from, you will never know where to lead. He closed his speech with the words written on the classroom notebooks. This is your story. Write it boldly. Then he bowed his head, and silence followed. Then, a standing ovation, not the kind of applause that comes from habit, but the kind that rises from the soul. A few diplomats wiped their eyes. An education minister from Kenya stood with both hands over her heart. Modi, watching from New Delhi, smiled quietly and whispered to an aide. Today, India didn't speak in broken English. It spoke in unshakable truth. After the speech, dozens of country leaders requested meetings, not to talk about search engines, but to ask how they could adopt the Classroom of Dreams model. Sundar declined interviews. Instead, he called his mother, Amma. I think people heard us today. Lakshmi, sitting in her simple Chennai home, replied with calm love. They didn't hear us, Kanna. They felt us. 2 days later, a photo went viral. A girl in a blue uniform stood barefoot outside a school wall, freshly painted with the words, "Every child matters. Every desk is a revolution." She held a hand-drawn sketch of Sundar, with the words, "If he came from here, I can go anywhere." Back in California, Sundar returned to his office, but something had changed. He no longer measured success by product, launches, or quarterly reports. He began to measure it by how many children were finally sitting in classrooms with their backs straight and eyes full of light. The invitation arrived, wrapped in soft silk paper, with a golden border. It wasn't sent by email. It wasn't delivered by an assistant. It came by hand, carried respectfully by a government official who waited quietly until Sundar himself opened the door. He read it slowly. You are invited to attend the National Unity celebration at Rashtrapati Bhavan as guest of honor. A special tribute will be presented. Attendance of your mother, Mrs. Lakshmi, Pichai, is also requested. For a moment, Sundar stood still, not because he didn't understand what it meant, but because deep inside, he felt something rare, something that wasn't pride or fear. It was the weight of history reaching back to tap his shoulder. Rashtrapati Bhavan stood tall and glowing that evening. Golden lights bathed its walls. Tricolor flags waved gently in the warm breeze. Thousands of citizens had gathered outside the gates to watch the live broadcast on large screens. Inside, the grand hall was filled with leaders from every walk of life: scientists, teachers, farmers, artists, doctors, and soldiers. Each of them had contributed something to the soul of the nation. And in the front row, dressed in a simple cotton sari with a silver border, sat Lakshmi Pichai. She clutched the invitation in her lap, unable to stop the shaking in her fingers. "Oh," Sundar whispered gently, "we're here because of you." "No, Kanna," she replied with a soft smile. "You brought me here." Prime Minister Modi walked in shortly after. Applause rose across the room. He walked up to the stage, nodded politely to the president. then turned toward the microphone. His voice was calm, deliberate, and carried across every speaker with steady grace. "My fellow citizens," he said, "tonight we gather to honor not just achievements, but values. The values that make this country rise even when the odds are against it. Humility, kindness, resilience, and the courage to remember where we began." He paused. "I would like to call someone to the stage now. Someone who doesn't just lead in the world of technology, but who leads by remembering the broken classrooms, the humble meals, and the quiet sacrifices that shaped him." He looked toward Sundar. "Mr. Sundar, Pichai, please come forward." The hall stood. Sundar walked to the stage slowly. He wore a cream-colored kurta, simple and soft, nothing flashy, nothing loud. As he walked past each row, people touched their hands to their hearts. Some bowed their heads. He stood beside Modi. Modi continued, "Today, we recognize not just the man-bet, the mission to rebuild our classrooms, to give every child not just a seat, but a chance." He turned to Lakshmi, and behind that mission, Modi said, his voice softening, "was a woman who wrote a letter years ago, a letter that reminded me that greatness often begins in silence." He raised his hand and gestured toward her. "Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai, will you please join us on stage?" Lakshmi froze. A small gasp rose in the hall. No one had ever seen a sitting prime minister call a citizen mother to the national stage like this. Sundar reached down gently and helped his mother stand. She walked slowly, each step trembling, not from fear, but from something sacred. As she reached the stage, Modi stepped aside. Then he did something no one expected. He bent down slightly and touched her feet. The room went silent. Not a whisper, not a breath, just tears. Tears on the cheeks of leaders, journalists, even the guards at the edge of the room. Because in that single moment, India didn't just honor a CEO. It honored every mother who woke before sunrise, who stitched school uniforms late into the night, who skipped lunch to pay exam fees, and who carried their child's dream longer than they carried their own. Modi stood and said, "In this mother, we see the spirit of Bharat Mata. We see the fire that keeps our nation moving forward one child at a time." He turned to the president. "With your permission, we present the National Citizen's Honor of the Year jointly awarded to Mr. Sundar Pichai and Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai for redefining the meaning of success." A gold medallion was placed around Sundar's neck, but the second medallion, smaller, gentler, was placed around Lakshmi's, and she wept. Not loudly, just enough that Sundar had to hold her hand tightly. Outside the gates, the crowd began chanting, "Classroom of Dreams, Classroom of Dreams." In villages across India, children watched on TV sets powered by solar panels. In one school in Bihar, a young girl stood up and shouted, "If Uma can be honored, so can my Uma." In Punjab, a boy who hadn't spoken in class for weeks stood and read a poem out loud. In Kashmir, a teacher wrote on the board in big letters, "Never forget where you came from." The next morning, the papers told the story in every language. A mother's letter changed a nation. Lakshmi Pichai honored India, bows to its real heroes, from Chennai to Rashtrapati Bhavana, journey made of belief. Sundar didn't say much after the ceremony. He walked with his mother to the garden behind the hall. They sat quietly. Birds chirped. Sunlight broke through the trees. Lakshmi said, "I never imagined this. I just wanted you to study well." Sundar smiled. "And now your name will be remembered by millions." She shook her head. "Names fade, but kindness stays." A week later, a new school opened in a small village in Maharashtra. On the wall was a message. "This school is dedicated to every child who dreams, and to every mother who dares to believe in them." Beneath it was a plaque. It read, "The future was built by the hands of a woman named Lakshmi." And in that quiet corner of India, a legacy was born. Not one of power, not one of wealth, but one of belief that shook the world. Across India, the Classroom of Dreams initiative had spread like a quiet revolution. One school after another was rebuilt. Children once too shy to speak were now leading morning assemblies. Teachers who had once worked with broken chalks now had access to tablets and training sessions. Even in the most remote parts of the northeast and tribal belts of Madhya Pradesh, new classrooms stood like lighthouses of hope. But for Sundar, the biggest transformation was something else. It was inside him. His role as a CEO didn't change, but the way he saw his job did. Every meeting, every innovation, every product now began with a question in his heart. How does this serve the child sitting on a dusty floor with no shoes? He had turned from a leader of a company into a servant of a cause. One afternoon, he was invited to deliver a talk at a global innovation festival in Tokyo. He stood on stage, smiled softly, and began with a sentence no one expected. "I want to talk about my mother." The crowd laughed gently, but Sundar didn't. He continued, "Because everything I know about design, leadership, and compassion I learned from her." Then he held up an object from his pocket, a small metal lunchbox. He said, "This was mine. It's old, dented, and smells a little like sambar. But inside this box lived every value that built me: discipline, effort, humility, and love." He held it up proudly and said, "We spend billions designing new systems. But what we need more of are people who remember the values that built them." The world clapped, but Sundar never sought applause. Back in Chennai, Lakshmi remained the same. She still cooked her own meals, still took the bus, still gave away half her pension to sponsor books for girls in the neighborhood. One morning, she called Sundar. Her voice was soft. "Kanna, will you come home for my birthday?" He smiled. "Of course, Amma. What do you want as a gift?" She paused, then said gently, "I want you to visit your Appa's grave with me." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, we'll go together." The next morning, they stood quietly at the small cemetery just outside Chennai. It was cloudy. Sundar cleaned the headstone with a cloth. Lakshmi placed jasmine flowers on it. They stood there for a while, not speaking, just remembering. Finally, Lakshmi said, "He didn't live to see all this, but I think he always believed it would happen." Sundar replied, "He was the first dreamer." Lakshmi chuckled softly, "And the first to panic when you failed math once." They both laughed. Then Sundar knelt down, placed the lunchbox beside the grave, and whispered, "Thank you, Appa." Later that week, Lakshmi fell ill. Nothing serious at first, a little tiredness, then fever, then weakness. Sundar brought her to Delhi for treatment. The doctors said it was age. Her body was slowing down. Sundar stayed with her day and night. One night, as she lay resting, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "Promise me something." He leaned forward. "Anything. Don't ever forget what this was about." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "Not about fame, not about speeches, but about belief and kindness." He kissed her forehead. "I'll never forget." She smiled. "Good. Now go get some sleep. You still look like that tired boy with a pencil behind his ear." They both smiled. Lakshmi passed away peacefully 3 days later. The news broke across the country. India's mother of dreams passes away. Lakshmi Pichai, the woman behind the man who changed classrooms forever. Nation mourns. The quiet fire that lit thousands of minds. Thousands attended her funeral. Not just leaders and celebrities, but children. Hundreds of children, from every village where a classroom had been rebuilt. From the first school in Chennai, to the newest one in Kashmir. They came holding signs. "Thank you, Amma Lakshmi. Your dream is now our dream." Sundar didn't speak that day. He couldn't. He just stood beside her and wept, openly grateful, broken, whole. 1 year later, Sundar was invited to inaugurate the Lakshmi Institute of Learning, a national center that would train teachers across the country with the latest tools and timeless values. He walked through the halls quietly. At the entrance stood a statue of Lakshmi, not grand, just her sitting on a chair with a steel lunchbox in her lap and a soft smile on her face. Beneath it were her words, carved in stone. I didn't raise a CEO, I raised a child who remembered. As the sun set over Chennai that evening, a group of children sat under a tree, studying with tablets and notebooks provided by Classroom of Dreams. One boy looked up and asked his teacher, "Miss, is it true that Sundar sir came from a school just like ours?" The teacher smiled. "Yes, and because he remembered us, now the whole world remembers him." And somewhere, in the quiet stillness of a gentle evening, the spirit of Lakshmi smiled, because her final lesson had been learned, not by one child, but by a nation.